Hey, what's up everybody? My name is Bilawal Sidhu. I'm a creative technologist and the host of the TED AI Show. And today I have the distinct pleasure of sitting down with the man, the myth, the legend, Vinod Khosla. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here.
So you gave a TED Talk this past April. You made 12 predictions about the future, or plausible futures as you described them. Yeah. Let's go into them in detail, shall we?
Sure.
You talk about a world where expertise will be nearly free. It's a commodity. Can you paint a picture for what that will actually look like?
Well, any expertise will be embodied in an AI system. So whether you're talking about something like a structural engineer, an oncologist, a primary care doctor, or a mental health therapist, it'll all be free. If you need a tutor for your kids, it'll be an AI tutor that can pay a level of attention that human tutors can't. An AI tutor, within a short period of time, tens of minutes, will be able to tell what you know, what you don't, what concepts are you confused about, and figure out the gaps in your knowledge as a student, and be able to teach and tutor to those gaps. No human can go to that level of fine-grained
Personalization almost.
More than personalization, it's assessing your gaps in knowledge and then teaching to it. Or an oncologist sort of remembering the last 5,000 papers in a particular type of cancer and knowing which gene mutation is treatable or not, or other factors that might affect outcomes in that tumor. So very fine-grained, detailed, very broad knowledge bases, and yet extremely personalized to a situation.
That's amazing. It almost starts like, in this world, expertise starts sounding like a utility, where it's something you just take for granted. It's like running water, it's electricity, it's like your internet connectivity. It's sort of pervasive and always there. Is that kind of what it's going to look like, or do you think there's still going to be like a divide between, let's say, the amazing care somebody in India is going to be able to get versus the amazing healthcare somebody here in the US is going to get?
Well, so first let's talk timelines. Sure. The next 10 years, I think these systems will be run like co-pilots, overseen by a human being. As you get to 20 years or 25 years, you're talking about completely independent operation, because they'll be better than most humans, if not all humans, and fairly comprehensive. You know, no patient, a cancer patient, for example, has one issue. They have a cancer, but they may also have diabetes. They may also be obese or not. So, and they may have different nutrition requirements. So that level of detail, what nutrition package works best for this patient, will be a detailed analysis based on gobs of data. Too much data for a human to put all together and come up with the right prescription. And so expertise will be deeper and more specialized, obviously taught to it by human beings, so the first decade or so, when the humans are acting as overseers of any of these AI systems, and then as co-pilots, and then eventually it'll start to exceed the capability of any human, definitely beyond the 10 years, if not sooner.
So what happens in that world? Let's say we're 10 years down. Is this going to be the case where like the disparity, like compute is still going to matter? What I mean by that is, you know, maybe, somebody sitting in India gets access to one, H600 GPU to crunch up all their like medical records and their biometric data and their health tracking data, all that stuff to make a very, tailor-suited recommendation. But the affluent and the rich will, I don't know, have like a cluster of 1,024 H600s running to give you even more insights. In other words, is this a world in which like both the floor and sort of the ceiling is going to rise? Like everyone's going to get good enough healthcare, but then the people who can really afford it are going to get something that's next level and almost, dare I say, godlike.
Well, so in the short term, short term means 10 years or less. I would venture to guess what we will see is, and I wrote about this in 2016 when I wrote a large 100-page blog post called 20% Doctor Included. I said, I will get better cardiac care in a village in India than at Stanford because the experts at Stanford will still be here. And I was being half facetious, but it's not facetious. These AI systems will do better than humans, and humans who work with them as co-pilots will do better, just like in chess, where any chess program could beat any human, but a human and a chess program could beat any chess program and any human. That was true for a while. Eventually, the chess programs got better, where they can beat almost anybody else. But this pattern will surely be true of co-pilot and oversight for the next decade. But where the humans insist on being experts, like at Stanford Hospital, it's unlikely the cardiologist there will retire. You'll start to see them insert capability that maybe isn't warranted, which is really their own biases. Yeah, and humans have a lot of biases and other flaws in their thinking, a recency bias on what has happened before, where they were trained, what the care practice is in a hospital system. I mean, I find it silly that even among the major hospital systems, they have very different care practices and very different care pathways. So if you as a patient walk into 3 different systems, the treatment you get depends on the doctor you get, not on the disease you have. Why? Because they have these different care pathways. And that shouldn't be the case. For you as a person, given all your history, there's an ideal treatment, and I think AI systems will do that really well. So you will do much more optimization. But the big thing to look at, if you take 1 million doctors in the US, on average maybe making $300K a year. That's $300 billion worth of expertise. They'll operate like 10 times as much. Could be $3 trillion worth of expertise, but it costs a fraction. And so these trends of expertise being free will also be hugely deflationary on the economy, and because of that, accessible to everybody. I don't think there'll be a major difference between what the rich can access and the poor can access. I don't think compute will cost enough to matter.
It's a really interesting point that does seem counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it makes total sense that markets that will have more accommodative policy and institutional framework that will be more willing to try up sort of a ground up rehaul of the system versus sprinkling a little AI here and there might see far greater productivity gains and experience that force multiplier effect versus.
Well, and they will for a while, for a decade or so, probably likely. Long term, very unlikely. In fact, there's almost no chance in 20 years. You know, as these AI systems develop more reasoning capability and greater depth of precision in their thinking, you'll start to have amazing creativity from scientists. People don't think of creativity in science, but if you imagine DNA, it was conceived in a dream.
Totally, yeah.
And those kinds of thinking out of the box, imagining other things, and AI scientists will be able to do and complement a real scientist. So that's another example of expertise being near free, but it's much more important than that because it'll exponentially increase the rate of innovation.
Absolutely.
Because innovation depends on new science, new technology. All that will start to accelerate so fast, it's almost hard to imagine where that will lead us. If AI is doing most of the computer programming, programming will become near free. How we use it, everybody will become a programmer. There may be 1 billion programmers on the planet, able to immediately conjure up, have machines do what they need done in normal human language and voice. If the machine got it wrong, say, no, I meant X, Y, Z. So programming will be near free. And because of that, computing will become more like a utility in the background, sort of like electricity. We notice it when it doesn't work, but mostly it just does its thing. And when we say, hey, create this piece of artwork for me, it does. Or, hey, diagnose this disease, or what should I do about my nutrition? It just tells me. I don't need a programmer to program things. So I do think it'll be a whole world where computing goes much more into the background like a utility and much less visible to us. The other important thing, today you say, hey, I learned how to use Excel, or I learned how to use Oracle databases or SQL programming. Computers will adapt to humans. Humans won't need to adapt to computers. And today, it's frustrating. Many people need to adapt to humans. Think of all the older people who hate computers and hate using them because they're not intuitive. Well, that will go away. Computers will learn humans instead of humans needing to learn computers.
There's something magical about meeting people where they are, right? Because even if the incremental cost of creating software is going down to zero, let's say over time, it's opening up this sort of dark art of software development or visual creation to so many other people that just couldn't do it. I mean, like, you know, people are debating all these hybrid roles, like who's going to be left in the sort of in the tech trifecta of the designer, the PM, and the engineer. Like in that trifecta, is it going to be like designer with like a little bit of engineering chops that can now do front-end web development? And all the front-end software engineers are like, holy crap, am I going to get replaced? Other folks are like, holy crap, if a PM has access to the new Figma stuff or the new Claude AI stuff, like they're going to be able to replace me. Like, how do you see sort of that, the job functions evolving as this technology gets more and more intuitive?
Or in the case of a tutor, it'll be very, very clear that you need to map a student's learning where they're confusing two concepts. Yeah, if a student says, hey, how come you need oxygen to burn, but there's no oxygen on the sun and it's burning? You know they're confusing a concept like nuclear fusion with combustion. Now, an AI can start to tutor to that gap in knowledge or confusion in knowledge, for example.
And the same applies to the tutoring example too. The fact that it is, you know, you are a person, as a person, this is how you feel. The number of times in a class you have different students who will continue learning with a curriculum that's like a pace good enough for like a broad swath of students. They won't have all those like basic, all those inconsistencies in their own knowledge graph, if you will keep stacking up and won't be addressed.
No, absolutely right. You know, and already, my wife runs a nonprofit called CK12, and they have free AI tutors available to everybody.
That's cool.
But more importantly, all the content can be below grade for a student who's below grade, above grade, or at grade. And you can tutor in the language of the student. In the modality, if some people are better graphic learners than textual learners, it actually changes the modality of teaching in real time and adapts to the student. And if a student says, hey, I'm much more interested in soccer than I am in ballet, they'll teach them spin through soccer examples, because generative AI can in real time generate the content to say, I'll frame this in soccer terms. Another says, no, I want to be a ballerina. There's spin involved there too. And you can teach in that context. And this is what's missing from education. Students don't understand why spin is relevant to their life. And if you can make it relevant, they'll be much more interested. They'll want to improve their ballet or their soccer. Or if they want to be an aeronautical engineer, then let's teach it appropriately in the area of your interest at the level at which you are at, so you can learn incrementally and not be confused because it's too large a jump, not the same jump for all 50 students in a class. It also does one other thing. It frees up the teacher from lecturing, which is a couple of 100-year-old paradigm of teaching, to being a motivator, to being a coach. They can have a very different role, much more important role. How do you be a motivator for a student who's down today?
I love this point about contextualization, because really, if you're looking at some esoteric subject matter, let's say you're even just going through physics, right? Like physics in high school, contextualizing that for the athlete, you know, the soccer player versus the ballerina will make such a huge difference. And then the point you're making about modality too, visualizing, if you're a visual learner or textual learner, I mean, I often think about, you know, reading about an amoeba is one thing. It's another thing entirely to see the glistening glob scaled up. I'll retain it better because I'm a visual learner. It's interesting that this technology can really actually help you solidify your concepts better by just tailoring it to the things that you actually care about.
Oh, absolutely. This personalization to the level of the student you are you at grade, above grade, below grade? And also turning it with generative content into much more interesting thing. Imagine if the lesson on amoeba was taught by a Hollywood producer or a director. Generative AI could generate that content and make it so much more interesting.
Totally.
Like a biofilm forming or in bacteria, or an amoeba behaving as they do or as visualized by a director, much more memorable, much more interesting. And of course, if you want to be an aeronautical or a rocket engineer, in that context, every lesson can be taught. Or if you want to be a ballerina, then teach spin that way. So much more contextual, much more interesting, much more personalized. And the teacher becomes much more of a coach and a cheerleader and a motivator, not a lecturer. The lecture paradigm is hundreds of years old, and we've gotten to bigger and bigger class sizes, which makes it very hard and very unrewarding for a teacher. It would be much more rewarding to really unlock human potential, because that's what you as a human love to do with 6, 10-year-old kids.
Can we make that similar case for teachers too? Like, because teachers feels like a... All right, so in the situation of the Stanford, you know, doctors as experts, right? Doctors as experts clearly spent their entire career getting to a point where they're sort of, you know, the purveyors of knowledge and wisdom and medical advice, clearly. You've got a group of people that have clearly spent decades building expertise to the point where they are sort of the purveyors of medical knowledge and insight. And they might be very cautious to adopt technology that doesn't have perfect precision and recall. And so what would you say to folks that would be dragging their feet in this matter and kind of like making the case that, hey, it's almost reckless for us to roll out this technology so quickly, you know, and oh yeah, it makes sense for markets like, you know, like the global South, it makes sense because it's better than nothing. But is that actually the case? It almost feels like the force multiplier effect of a talented doctor with generative AI and other associated capabilities would be much bigger and more impactful. So there should be an inherent incentive to adopt this tech. But why isn't there? Why do people drag their feet?
Just like any other area, there'll be Luddites who are skeptical.
I think let's take a moment to just define the term Luddite, right? Luddite comes up as a term in modern conversations around people who are resistant to the adoption of new technology. And as I looked into this, it turned out the origin of the term comes from the Industrial Revolution. Essentially, English textile workers that would sneak in the middle of the night and basically break these like looms, these machines that were basically automating a bunch of stuff that they did after building this deep expertise on how to create very high quality fabric. Not only did these power looms threaten the jobs of these artisanal textile workers, but it allowed companies to drastically scale up the production of textiles and fabrics and start employing less skilled labor, right? Including kids at some point, right? And so the cloth that these machines produce was of drastically lower quality, but they could produce so much of it that it ended up being a good business decision. What do you have to say about that? Because there's an interesting analogy to be made with code, with art, with what have you, where less skilled people can now do the same thing and basically flood the market with subpar creations that are still economically viable for the people that are building the tools of creation, if you will.
it's economically viable because somebody is buying them, right?
Fair enough.
But let's look at a number of aspects of this.
Yeah.
First, every time there's a technology change,
Yep.
people object. People objected to the printing press.
Yep.
People objected in the 1800s to the railroad. And I think these monsters running across the countryside was a phrase I think was used.
Even bicycles, by the way.
Yeah. So people object to any large technology change.
Yeah.
And they have irrational fears that sometimes do come true, but mostly get addressed. The process of technology innovation is making a change and then figuring out what's wrong with that change and improving it. So take textiles with looms. Yes, you can initially produce pretty coarse fabric, but guess what's happened over time? It got finer and finer, and we can do things now that we couldn't possibly do by hand.
Totally.
So the quality is much better. You can add stretch, you can add lots of other fabric types. It's a lot more creative in the kinds of fabrics we can produce. So technology improves with use and by pointing out the flaws in it, so the people inventing new stuff can go back and improve those things. So that's one axis. Things do improve. AI for sure will be clumsy when it starts. That's why I say you might have an intern doctor, right? Or an intern software programmer, as Cognition Labs is talking about. You know, they're selling interns, software interns, but they get better with use, and over time, they're much, much better than any other path. But I want to point out something else. I do think we will have enough abundance that if some people choose to opt out of this system, they will be allowed to. You know, we do have the Amish today. They have opted out of the world of technology, and I think a much broader swath of society will get that choice.
Totally.
They can opt out, and I think we should allow them to opt out and be considerate of opting out. You know, there's people who don't like to use cell phones today. Small fraction, but we let them opt out. And they don't want the convenience. That's sort of their choice. So I do think, in general, we will be able to afford much more choice, to be an Amish of the next generation, to be AI-free in the next generation. And I think very small percentage will opt out, but if more do, great. There's no harm, no foul in that. And so between technology improving and doing things better and better, and giving people the choice to opt out, I think that's the right way policy should be directed.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it's like maybe you want to be just the Amish for the weekend, right? I don't want any tech on the weekend. Then you go back into the belly of the beast when the week comes around.
Yep. In fact, I love to go to places where there's no internet access or cell phone service, and just have a weekend to just do my thing, or just hike, or just, those are my favorite things to do, to be disconnected.
Mine too, though it is interesting where that's a way of like tethering ourselves and anchoring ourselves to what it means to be human, right? In a way, when we go back to some of these more, primal activities, it does feel like, unlike the Industrial Revolution, where we took a bunch of humans and kind of squeezed them into these very, unfavorable working conditions to make this mechanical machine work, it feels like this technology is different in that we can interact with it in a way that is far more natural to us, and that it's almost adapting to us versus us adapting to it.
So I think the first word I would use is freedom. Because technology will be capable of doing so much, we will work if we want to, not because we need to. We will work in the way we want to, when we want to. So we will have a lot more freedom to be driven by our internal drives, our internal compass. And I think that's going to be really fulfilling for humanity. Like, to be driven by yourself. And some will still have the ego race or the status race or the fan base race, but others will opt out of it. I mostly don't care what other people think, and I sort of do my thing, and it seems to work for me. So we do have that. Another thing that's happened is today we don't really think of electricity except when we don't have it.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I suspect the most valuable thing, at least for the next decade, and this may go away over the longer term, is people who are creative and people who have empathy. That means empathy for the user of whatever you're trying to build. That's a unique capability some people are much better at than others. And that sort of empathy for your user and creativity about the range of solutions you can offer. So what you want to do becomes much more important than how you want to do it, because the AI will do it for you. And I think that's how the world will go. So today, the engineer may be all-powerful. That may invert in the future. I always used to say, don't go get a liberal arts degree. You're not learning any skill because you're not going to get a job and be able to support your family. That may invert completely to
Go learn the classics, Go learn Socratic thought.
creativity, imagination, empathy, connecting with other humans. Those are different skills. Those may become the most important skill.
That is very true. I think there's a talk about generationally teaching people things even like conflict resolution, right? Okay, maybe there's some MBA class that's taught on this, but everyone needs that. It shouldn't be relegated as a graduate level topic. Let's teach it to kids earlier on, because if we're dealing with humans, we're going to need to deal with conflict, and we're going to need to figure out ways to work together.
I think we will both have much more teaching of empathy and room to have empathy. Because in the name of efficiency, sometimes empathy gets lost.
That's a great point. Yeah. This is like, only in a world of abundance can you think about certain things, right? If you're working hard to make ends meet or, achieve some economic incentive, you don't have time to be, in quotes, ethical even at times. So there should be an inherent incentive to adopt this tech, but why isn't there? Why do people drag their feet?
Just like in any other area, there'll be Luddites who are skeptical. Some skepticism will be warranted, and others who will be forward and even ahead of where the technology is. So some will be too optimistic, some will be pessimistic. That's likely. I think we will have a situation which will depend on how compensation systems are configured. If an AI does a consult and the cardiologist misses a consult because the AI did it, he's not getting paid. He gets paid for the AI, and he oversees the AI and says, hey, it's doing okay.
Yeah, I signed off on this.
So compensation systems, incentive systems will determine a lot of how this is adapted. Now, in general, we talk about technology-based disruption. It's exciting to write about, to be the disruptor. It's not very fun to be disrupted.
Very true.
And so incumbents have legitimate reasons to hold back, slow things down. And sometimes it takes structural changes like the compensation system, like billing codes in the US matter to who makes how much money. And if you can set them up right, then you'll see much better care for the patient, much more frequent care. It wouldn't be unusual. Today, the average patient in the US sees their primary care physician once a year. But if you have a major disease, a healthy person doesn't need to do that. They may consult their AI primary care physician who'd also be an AI nutritionist. Yeah, something about their food or nutrition habits or things like that.
Looking at the lifestyle as a whole.
Yeah. But if you have diabetes, you could use a nudge or a behavior change every single day. And so will 100 touch points every 100 days be unreasonable? No, they'll be essentially free. So the level of care can go up a lot, whether you call it with a primary care physician, a nutritionist, a coach, whatever you want to call it, it's the same expertise
Right.
with a different face on it, doing a different function. So I'm pretty excited about how much more we can do instead of the average patient seeing their primary care physician once a year, which is the standard in the US.
Now, education is the other example we talked about, and it seems the incentives align there, right? Like class sizes are only going up. God, I can't imagine any teacher that enjoys grading papers back to back to back to back. That has to be exhausting.
Yeah.
And almost like, that's the drudgery of teaching, if you will. And so this future you describe where the teacher is sort of like this coach, this orchestrator that's helping all the students be successful, and doing the fun parts and the enriching parts of being a teacher versus the drudgery. And also, by the way, having a TA that's kind of like working with the students when on call, so they don't like email you on the weekends.
24/7.
24/7, yeah, really.
And you play the right role. As a human being, you lead, you motivate, you provide guidance to kids. So I am very excited about what's possible. And frankly, it's the only way to get equality in education. I can afford to hire a personal tutor for my kids if I need to, but not everybody can. And so if you're going for equality, we'll have to have AI doctors, AI primary tutors, AI, you name it, oncologists. Most people in India will never see an oncologist even if they get cancer. That's sad. Most people in the US, discover they have cardiac disease, usually 20 to 30 years after it started.
Wow, yeah.
Right? And they discover it by having a heart attack, which is such an archaic way. If somebody could monitor your watch and say your heart rate's changing, let's look at X or Y, or buy a $99 ECG or from a machine from Apple, from AliveCore, and let's just monitor it. So very exciting possibility.
Another interesting point you're bringing up is like you've got expertise on one hand. On the other hand, you're talking about fitness trackers. We have all this data that's kind of sitting around that isn't actually utilized. There was this whole trend of the quantified self, and now digital twin is a very trendy word. And we have facets of our activity and how our body behaves on all these different services and applications and I guess medical providers sitting around. There seems like there's a huge opportunity to make healthcare less of a intervention when something goes egregiously wrong, but actually preempt that from ever happening. How do you think about that?
Well, that's exciting because most diseases that start, and most of the expensive diseases, which are the chronic diseases, start decades before. Whether it's diabetes or cardiac disease or hypertension or precursors to stroke, that all start early. We can detect them early by looking at data. There's too much data for humans to look at. Whether you're looking at your heart rate variability over the course of 10 years, or you're looking at the transcriptome of your microbiome. Your transcriptome is what your genes are doing, or what your microbiome's genes are doing. All the bugs in your stomach expressing RNA, and you can get 1 million data points from one poop sample.
Wow.
Not only that, you can get 1 million data points from what your body is doing in response to that microbiome. It's sitting in your gut. It's doing things. Your body responds.
The cause and effect relationships are being mapped.
Now, if I give a physician 1 million data points of what your transcriptome is doing and what your microbiome's transcriptome is doing, they can't do anything with it. I combine it with continuous heart rate variability data or body temperature data, or give your favorite measurement.
Sure, yeah.
Humans can't handle that data. And so humans should be co-pilots. AI can easily handle that much data and give you much more precise diagnosis. In fact, it's pretty clear the best way to detect COVID by heart rate change very early. And a Stanford professor did that work very early to prove you can detect it. The onset of an infection or the onset of diabetes. So lots of stuff to be discovered. One of the flaws in our current thinking is we are trying to collect data that humans can use, when we should be collecting all data whether humans can use it or not. My favorite example is of a normal ECG. You can detect blood potassium level, which is very important to heart function, cardiac function. But no human could say, you're hypokalemic, your blood potassium is over 4 or 5, whatever the right number is. So a lot more data to be had, a lot more precise and very early prediction. When you get to constant monitoring, early prediction, then you get to a world where most disease becomes real healthcare. What we call healthcare today is sick care. People get treated when they get sick. We don't try and maintain people healthy. And I think we'll get much more closer to healthcare than sick care.
I love that. How far out do you think this future is where maybe, we could opt in, sort of my Apple Health data, maybe whatever my medical provider, One Medical has sitting around, and then whatever other tests I need to do to start getting real healthcare. Where are we in that adoption curve?
Well, we are still developing the AI technologies to do them reliably enough to be a co-pilot to humans.
Right. Okay.
There's a lot of skepticism among physicians, MDs, about what these systems can't do, and they point to the flaws, and there are flaws in the system, as opposed to point to all the good things they can do.
Yeah.
And say, if there's an occasional flaw, I'm the overseer of this, and I will control what gets to the patient. That's the right way to approach this, is oversight by a physician and AI, both doing more practice, many more touch points with the patient, but also learning from the physician and getting better. It's like today we are probably at an AI intern, a medical intern level, and that will become an MD.
It's coming for the MDs.
So that is I think there's a process to that. And humans just resist that kind of radical change. That's a little disappointing. But I want to point out one other thing. One of the reasons I call these plausible tomorrows is they're not predictions in the sense of no matter what happens, these things will happen. They will happen when somebody drives this change. Almost certainly, we'd have almost no electric cars if Elon Musk hadn't driven electric cars. In fact, the Department of Energy's forecast, having talked to General Motors and Volkswagen, all the experts, was there'd be almost no electric cars before 2035. And then Elon didn't read that forecast and just made it happen. Each of these, an AI doctor, an AI tutor, will happen because somebody drives that change, and that will depend on entrepreneurs. Almost no institution drives that kind of rapid change.
What is it about expertise that almost creates sort of this veil around, these possible futures? It almost anchors you too much to the status quo, yet that's something we all strive to achieve, right?
Experts extrapolate the past. They don't invent a new vision. And then they don't make it happen. And these things, radical departures from the normal progression, only happen when somebody drives them. So experts extrapolate the past, entrepreneurs imagine the future, and then make it happen. And it's the make it happen where it takes an entrepreneur, because in larger organizations, people regress to the mean opinion, which is incremental change.
Oh yeah, don't rock the boats. Let's keep everything as is.
In the 40 years I've been doing innovation, I can't think of a single example of a large innovation, starting in, say, 1980, when I got into the business of innovation, that was driven by an expert in an area, an institution, a big company. I talk to people about energy, and people say, well, General Electric and Siemens will innovate energy. No. When you look at rockets, Rocket Lab and SpaceX drove that change. What Lockheed and Airbus and Boeing couldn't do. When you look at Uber, it wasn't Hertz and Avis. When you look at Airbnb, it wasn't Hyatt and Hilton. No matter where I look, the large innovation has come from some entrepreneur saying this new vision is plausible. I'm going to just try and make it happen. And it won't happen in a linear line. They'll zig and zag, and they'll be wrong on some things and fail at some things and start up again. Entrepreneurial hubris is key to this. Entrepreneurial persistence to not stop when you run into problems, which every entrepreneur does, is key to this. So these are fundamentals of why the entrepreneurial ecosystem works. And because it's supported so well, so much of this is coming from the US, or Silicon Valley specifically.
So if there are policymakers and bureaucrats listening to this, what is their role in all of this? Should they just get out of the way and let entrepreneurs innovate? How do you find that middle ground or balance between innovation that has this like disregard for the impossible and creates a new future while also keeping things relatively on rails, shall we say?
Well, policymakers do have a large role. Policy can enhance or accelerate certain things or slow them down.
Incentives, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. So climate technologies depend a lot on policymakers and the right policies, because early on, if you're going to replace steel with green steel or cement with green cement or cars with electric cars, you need incentives. Where policymakers get it wrong is these incentives don't need to be long-term. They need to be short-term to get something started so it can be market competitive. And sometimes we support the wrong policies too long. But policy makes a difference. If we change what Medicare does in the US healthcare system for billing and allows AI to provide service, almost certainly AI technology will skyrocket. But they could say, no, we'll let the American Medical Association, AMA, define billing codes, which is what happens today. And of course, they will protect the income of the incumbents. Now, the good news is the AMA can, in fact, make sure incomes for their physicians remain the same. And we make up for the large shortage in physicians we're expecting in this country. Fully 20% of doctors say after COVID, they're going to retire in the next 5 years. Wow. That's an amazing shortage that AI can more than make up for. And ensure that people who are working keep getting the income they do because we make them co-pilots to AI, and make sure that we engineer their compensation and incentive schemes properly.